Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to a time when gods wore sandals. Drama was an Olympic sport and mortals could accidentally end up as livestock for mildly offending someone with a thunderbolt. Welcome to ancient Greece, home of olives, oaths, and stories that make soap operas look tame. You're standing on a sun-warmed hillside just above a temple. The marble steps are worn smooth, the columns wrapped in lazy ivy, and in the distance you hear a lyre being strummed out of tune by someone who's definitely been drinking diluted wine since sunrise. A warm breeze rolls past, carrying with it the scent of baked figs, crushed thyme, and maybe just a whiff of divine mischief. The kind that makes goats fall in love or accidentally creates a constellation. And that's the setting for tonight's little tangle of mythology. The tale of what happens when Hera, the queen of Olympus, and not exactly the patron goddess of forgiveness, gets jealous of a cow. And not just any cow, mind you, but a very specific, suspiciously well-groomed bovine. One with long lashes and the misfortune of being liked by Zeus. Yeah, you probably wouldn't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your current location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you're drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The day begins as many Greek myths do with someone praying. You're near the ancient city of Argos, and a young woman, Io, priestess of Hera, is offering a bundle of laurel leaves at a crumbling altar. She's not looking for fame or immortality. She just wants a good harvest and to avoid catching the eye of any immortals, which naturally guarantees she's about to. Zeus is watching, because of course he is. No lightning bolts, no thundering skies, just that quiet, unsettling attention that makes clouds swirl in place and olives drop from trees a little early. Io, meanwhile, is oblivious. She finishes her offering and walks home, Sandal's dusty eyes thoughtful. She's beautiful, yes, but also kind, serious, and extremely uninterested in being anyone's myth. But gods don't ask for consent. They just rewrite the script. You trail her as the sun sets, casting long gold shadows across the fields. Crickets begin their nightly rehearsal. Somewhere, a shepherd calls to his dog. And just as Io reaches her family's courtyard, the sky flickers not lightning, but something quieter. A sudden wind. A moment out of place. Zeus appears in a form that is either human or something slightly shinier than human. It's hard to tell. He doesn't speak. He just appears. And for Io, time tilts sideways. She tries to run, and depending on the version, she either succeeds or vanishes. But in all the tellings, one thing is consistent. Zeus's interest turns dangerous. He doesn't strike her down. He does something arguably worse. He turns her into a cow. Not just any cow, a shining white creature with wide eyes, delicate hooves, and a faint aura of divine tampering. Think goddess of grazing. It's unclear whether Zeus turns her into a cow to protect her or to hide her. Historians still argue whether this transformation was a mercy or a cover-up. Some say Io begged him for the disguise. Others say she screamed until she couldn't. Either way, here we are. You're now following a confused, freshly transformed cow as she wanders through the olive groves, mooing softly in a voice she doesn't recognize. Her thoughts are still human. Her fear, too. Birds avoid her. Dogs bark at her. The gods, for the moment, go silent. She tries to return to the temple, but her fellow priestesses scream and scatter. No one recognizes her except maybe the statues of Hera that seem to lean slightly as she passes, as if watching, as if judging. You rest for a moment under a fig tree, listening to Io breathe heavily through her new nostrils, and you realize this isn't going to be a short story. No, this is going to be a very long journey, hoof by hoof, prayer by prayer, stringed lyre, background music, and all. And it all started with a goddess who didn't like sharing her husband or her cows. The sun rises gently over the Peloponnesian hills, the kind of light that makes marble glow and cicadas start their morning arguments. You're walking alongside a rather regal cow Io, though nobody calls her that anymore. not out loud. Most just refer to her as that unusually pretty heifer. She doesn't look thrilled. Io, once a respected priestess of Hera, is now a four-legged grazer with lingering human memory and zero idea how grass is supposed to be chewed politely. It's unclear whether she can actually moo or if her vocal cords are still in emotional protest, but either way she keeps trying to communicate. No one's listening. Meanwhile, Zeus hovers invisibly above like a guilt-ridden storm cloud. He watches her plod across the fields, awkwardly dodge bees, and panic at her own reflection in a pond. He whispers reassurances into the wind, none of which are helpful when you've been turned into livestock by the king of Olympus. You'd think that might be the worst part, but no. The real danger is only just beginning. Because Hera, Zeus's wife goddess of marriage professional grudge holder, is starting to get curious. She's been watching her temples lately. Not for worshippers, but for signs of divine meddling. The sudden disappearance of her favorite priestess suspicious. The appearance of a glowing white cow who seems to cry during thunderstorms. Suspiciouser. And then there's Zeus, trying very hard not to be obvious, which for a god means being painfully obvious. He starts loitering near cow pastures. He drops by temples he hasn't visited in centuries. He offers sacrifices without demanding a parade. Honestly, the guy's trying. Hera notices. She always does. She's seated in her favorite sky chariot pulled by peacocks with a flair for synchronized strutting, sipping something made of starlight and passive aggression. She watches the fields below and raises one perfectly shaped eyebrow. Lovely cow, she says, very luminous. Historians still debate whether Hera knew right away that the cow was Io. Some say she played along for the drama. Others claim she genuinely thought Zeus had a new hobby involving divine cattle breeding. Either way, she decides to test him. She descends to earth, no thunder, no smoke, just quiet sandals on temple steps, and a smile sharp enough to slice figs. Zeus, she says, strolling through the pasture, where Io now lives nervously, twitching her tail. That cow, she's exquisite. Whose is she? Zeus, to his credit, tries to lie. Badly. Oh, that, just a cow, stray. Wild, maybe. Definitely not a transformed mortal I may or may not have. He trails off, realizing he's said too much by saying nothing. Hera beams. May I have her? Zeus hesitates. Stammers. Invents a reason involving agricultural festivals and regional heifer shortages. Hera insists. Her tone shifts just slightly from silk to iron. Surely if it's just a cow, you wouldn't mind if I looked after her. Cornered by his own hooves, Zeus surrenders. He hands over Io, still silent, still staring, with all the enthusiasm of someone signing away their browser history. And so Hera takes the cow. Not home, not to pasture. She takes her to a sacred grove enclosed by stone walls and guarded day and night by someone, or rather, something far worse than a bored goddess. Enter Argus Panoptus. You spot him lounging under an olive tree. At first, you think it's a trick of the shadows. Then you realize he has eyes everywhere. On his face, arms, legs, shoulders. The guy's a walking eyeball convention. Argus famously never sleeps. Not fully. He dozes in shifts, letting some eyes nap while others glare. He's been assigned one job: watch the cow. Don't let her escape. Don't blink for too long. And he's weirdly good at it. You watch as Io, still desperately mooing internally, is tied with a gilded rope and left in Argus's company. Every time she tries to sneak away, there's a cough, a blink, 1,000 simultaneous nope signals from Argus's many pupils. It's exhausting for everyone. Io lies down in the grass, defeated. Somewhere above, Zeus groans into his hands. Hera, back in her chariot, reclines contentedly and tells her peacocks they've earned a bonus. And you curl up beside the fence watching a cow with a human heart try to figure out how to outsmart a man who can literally sleep with his eyes open. You wonder not for the last time how the ancient Greeks managed to make divine romance feel exactly like a slow-burn workplace sitcom with better hair and worse outcomes. You're still by the grove fence watching Io pace in circles under the weary gaze of Argus Panoptes, his eyes some narrowed, some blinking. A few probably daydreaming track her every step like a divine security system that forgot what it's guarding. And honestly, being a cow is starting to wear on her. It's not just the lack of thumbs or the awkward hoof angles, it's the indignity. She was a priestess. She used to arrange fig offerings, bless harvests, and recite hymns in marble halls. Now she's being followed by a walking eyeball while trying not to trip on her own tail. You trail her through the pasture, the grass yellowing under the late summer sun. Flies buzz lazily overhead, and one persistent crow keeps landing too close to her ears. She huffs, flicks her tail, and stares longingly at the horizon. You can almost hear her thinking, there has to be more than this provincial farm. Meanwhile, Zeus is sulking. Back on Olympus, he sits on a golden throne that is somehow both majestic and uncomfortable. Eating grapes he doesn't want, and watching his very poorly hidden affair munch grass under the eye-clustered gaze of Hera's favorite enforcer. He's miffed, and as gods often do, he reacts with the maturity of a thunder-wielding teenager. He throws a cup across the sky. It becomes a star, sulks on a cloud, causes a minor drought, and eventually mutters, "Fine, I'll fix it." But how? Argus cannot be bribed. He's not there for money or glory. His entire vibe is, I'm only here because I like watching things blink. Zeus reluctantly turns to someone he rarely calls for cleanup duty, Hermes. Yes, that Hermes, the god of travel, trade, eloquence, and what might generously be called creative problem-solving. Picture a winged sandal courier with ADHD and a flute that doubles as both a sleep aid and a potential felony. Hermes shows up late, of course, brushing crumbs off his tunic and looking like he just got back from an olive and sauter party. What's the job, he asks, picking at a grape leaf. Zeus sighs. Free the cow. Hermes raises an eyebrow. The cow, Zeus pinches the bridge of his nose. Just neutralize the situation, gently, preferably with less thunder this time. And so Hermes descends to earth not in a blaze of glory, but as a wandering shepherd, staff in hand, hair wind-swept and just disheveled enough to pass as local. You watch from the trees as he approaches the grove where Argus is holding watch. Io freezes. She knows something's coming. She's just not sure whether it's good or another round of divine drama. Hermes smiles an expression that seems to glow a little more than it should. Nice cow, he says casually, sitting on a rock. Argus grunts. 87 of his eyes narrow. 12 more roll dramatically. Hermes nods, reaches into a pouch, and pulls out a pan flute. Mind if I play a little? Argus shrugs, or maybe doesn't. It's hard to tell when 90% of his body is eyelids. And then the melody begins. It's soft at first, wandering. A tune that smells like warm bread and sounds like falling asleep during a thunderstorm. You can almost feel the air thicken with drowsiness. Even the crow stops cawing. Hermes plays, and plays, and slowly, Argus begins to sway. He tries to stay alert. One eye blinks, then another. He shifts, adjusts, nods, then jolts upright. No, he mutters, watching. But the music swirls around him like a lullaby woven from goat's milk and nostalgia. Io watches frozen. You inch closer, heart pounding, or maybe that's just hooves echoing off the olive trees. And then, one eye closes, then another, then 5 more. The rest follow like dominoes. Argus slumps forward, snoring with a sound that can only be described as a gentle chime through wet reeds. Hermes stops playing. He stands, slowly brushes off his tunic again, and approaches Io. She steps back wary. She's had enough surprises for one myth, but Hermes just nods and unties her rope. You're free, he says softly, at least for now. Historians still argue whether Hermes killed Argus outright or simply lulled him into eternal rest. Some say his flute was enchanted. Others insist Argus died of boredom. Either way, the result is the same. Argus never wakes up, and Hera, oh Hera, notices. You're still in the grove when it happens. A warm wind shifts. The trees shiver. And far above you swear the clouds momentarily spell out the word, really. Because if Hera was suspicious before, now she's offended. You don't just take her cow, you don't outwit her babysitter, and you definitely don't make her look like a fool. The story is far from over. You duck instinctively as a sudden gust rattles the olive trees, whipping your hair with that oddly specific wind that only shows up when a goddess is done pretending to be civil. Somewhere above a thundercloud rolls itself dramatically into a spiral, even though Zeus isn't the one who's mad this time. Hera knows. She knows Argus is gone. She knows Hermes played his little lullaby trick. And she definitely knows that the cow Io is no longer tied up nicely in the sacred grove like an over-decorated lawn ornament. But Hera's not the sort to yell or toss things. That's more Zeus's move. No, she gets creative, strategically petty. And when it comes to vengeance, she prefers the long, slow simmer over the theatrical flash. You're barely out of the grove, trailing behind Io as she moves cautiously through the trees when you hear the first buzz. It's faint, like a single violin string plucked in the distance. Then louder. You swat at the air, but it isn't you the sound is hunting. Io lets out a low, miserable moo. Because Hera didn't just curse her with bovine form and a thousand-eyed babysitter. Now she's sent a gadfly. Yes, a bug. A tiny, persistent, stinging fly with divine authorization and a personal vendetta. It doesn't bite once. It doesn't even try to kill. That would be too kind. It torments, circling Io's eyes, darting at her ears, hovering just out of reach, always whining, always returning. A gnat from Olympus carrying the full weight of Hera's cold, amused wrath. Historians still debate whether the gadfly was an actual insect or a metaphor for divine guilt and unresolved jealousy. But the way Io flinches and stamps, it's safe to say metaphor or not, it hurts. She runs. You scramble to keep up as she barrels through the meadow hooves, tearing up soil, eyes wide with panic. The landscape blurs past shepherds who drop their crooks, past a startled goat, who may never emotionally recover, past farmers shouting about sacred cows wrecking their barley rows. Io doesn't stop. The gadfly doesn't stop. You hang on to the edge of the myth and try not to get trampled. Eventually, Io reaches the coast, somewhere near the Ionian Sea, which will very conveniently get its name from her. But don't tell her that right now. She's not in the mood for honors. She plunges into the surf, hoping the salt water will shake the fly loose. It doesn't. She swims. South mostly, east sometimes, wherever the fly isn't. Meanwhile, Zeus watches from Olympus, equal parts embarrassed and powerless. He could stop this in theory. But Hera's wrath has momentum now. Like a rolling amphora down a temple staircase, it's best not to stand in its way unless you want it to crack open on your pride. You catch up to Io on a rocky outcrop, where she's shivering and exhausted, nostrils flaring, eyes glazed. She hasn't spoken a word, not that she could not anymore, but her entire body is a poem of misery. And yet Hera's not done. Because here's the thing. Hera isn't angry at Io. Not really. She's angry at Zeus. But Hera doesn't attack head-on. She erodes. She makes you live with it. That's the punishment. Io, once a respected priestess, now spends her days being chased by a fly that represents a crime she didn't commit, running from a marriage she was never part of, and becoming the scenic route for an entire genre of mythology. You sit beside her as night falls. The moon glints off of the sea. The waves slap the rocks like lazy applause. The gadfly buzzes softly now, as if satisfied for the moment. And you realize something quietly tragic. This isn't a story about romance or punishment or even justice. It's about how sometimes just existing at the wrong moment can get you turned into a hoofnote in someone else's drama. By dawn, you're sore, salty, and beginning to suspect that divine wrath operates on a 24-hour schedule with no breaks for snacks. Io hasn't slept because cows can't lie down safely when there's a God-sent fly aiming for their eyelids. She stumbles up a sloping hill past low thorn bushes and silent fig trees, her sides heaving, her breath fogging in the early light. You follow behind her in the stillness, step by weary step. And yet somehow this wandering begins to feel mythic. Because as she walks driven by exhaustion, instinct or invisible fate, she starts to leave behind more than hoofprints. She leaves landmarks. According to later tales, some made up centuries after the fact by Greek poets with a flair for rebranding Io's desperate trek across the known world becomes the blueprint for geography itself. That river, she crossed it crying. That mountain, she ran up it, trying to escape Hera's buzzing spite. That coastline, it curves like a fleeing cow's path, and yes, they'll name it after her. The Ionian Sea. A salty tribute to the girl who became a cow became a myth and eventually became a map. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic retrofitting or a surprisingly honest travel blog from the Bronze Age. Either way, the story sticks. Io's journey literally carves itself into the land. You sit beneath a crooked olive tree rumored to have grown from one of her hoof scrapes and trace her route with your finger across the dirt. From Argos to Thessaly, through Thrace across the Bosphorus, named Cow Crossing in Greek, and on toward Egypt. Yes, Egypt. She doesn't stop until the continent changes. But back in the moment, she's still a cow still moving, and each time she slows, that gadfly returns like clockwork an alarm Hera keeps hitting just to remind everyone who's in charge. You pass a shepherd who doesn't blink as Io charges by. He just mutters, "The cow again," and goes back to tuning his panpipe. By the time you reach the Bosphorus, Io is half limping, half gliding on sheer stubbornness. The narrow strait between Asia and Europe stretches ahead of her like a silver ribbon, and she wades into the water without hesitation. You follow ankle-deep, shivering, wondering if Hera even likes geography or if she's just committing to the bit. On the far shore, a group of farmers are setting up a small shrine. To the cow that passed through, one of them says, placing figs in a shallow bowl. You ask if they know who she was. They shrug. Some say she was a goddess. Others say a curse, but we follow her path. It's clear. She made her mark. Io doesn't look back. It's not that she's brave exactly. It's just that when you've been transformed, stalked, gaslit by thunder, serenaded by a trickster, and chased by a celestial bug, turning around seems deeply unnecessary. You stop for the night in a dusty hollow near the shore. The stars overhead are unusually bright, possibly watching, possibly judging, possibly bored. Io lies down at last, not because the fly is gone, it isn't, but because her body simply refuses to go one step further. She rests her head on a patch of dry moss and breathes out in a long, low sigh. And in that silence, something strange happens. A shepherd nearby whispers a prayer. A merchant carves a small cow into his walking stick. A little girl ties a string around her wrist and says, "For the wanderer." The myth is taking shape, not through thunderbolts or oracles, but through repetition, through whispered empathy, through people seeing a tired creature pass by and deciding to remember her. You sit beside her and feel it too, that pull of story, soft and steady. Because yes, she's a cow, but she's also the line between continents. She's the namesake of a sea. She's the reason someone built a shrine near a river no one had noticed before. She's Hera's jealousy, Zeus's guilt, and humanity's instinct to name pain, trace it, and tell it again. And even if she doesn't know it, even if she never hears the stories that echo her hoofbeats, Io is becoming something more. She is becoming mythic. Morning slips in without fanfare. The sky, the pale color of old marble, and Io. Our bovine heroine wakes with her head still pressed against a patch of dusty moss that now smells faintly like divine exhaustion and dried sage. She doesn't stretch. Cows don't stretch, but if she could, she would probably groan brush the gadfly out of her inbox and whisper something deeply unprintable about Olympus. You, on the other hand, peel yourself off a lopsided rock and follow her as she begins walking again, not with urgency anymore, but with the resigned pacing of someone who's accepted that their life now comes with hooves and constant low-grade harassment. Today's journey cuts through a narrow valley. The wind is warm, the buzz of the gadfly persistent but less aggressive perhaps, even it is tiring. And as Io trudges along the path, villagers begin to appear again, watching from thresholds and low walls. No one asks why a shimmering white cow is passing through. It's Greece. Things happen. One old man waves politely and says, "There goes the holy beast again." A boy tosses her a bundle of fresh clover and shouts, "Hope she finds whatever she's looking for." Someone else, possibly a poet, scribbles something about sacred hoofy falls on a scrap of parchment. You start to notice something: people aren't afraid of her. In fact, they're reverent. Io somehow has become an icon, a wandering mystery, a living omen, and depending on which village you pass through, she's either a goddess in disguise, a cursed virgin, a cow sent by the stars to test local patience. And nobody knows she used to be a person. That part, the human part, is fading. She tries now and then to scratch her name into dirt to form shapes with her hooves, but it's hard to write Io when you don't have fingers and everyone keeps misinterpreting it as a moon symbol. Historians still argue whether Io's story was ever truly hers. Was she a symbol borrowed by later generations to explain rivers and borders? Was she a real priestess swallowed by mythology, or was she just an ordinary woman whose grief became so heavy it calcified into legend? You watch her move through yet another olive grove. The trees sway, the cicadas gossip, the gadfly returns for round 47. She flinches reflex now, not fear, and charges forward, stumbling into a wide-open clearing where the earth dips and swells in waves of sun-scorched grass. And there something changes, because standing at the middle of the field is a statue, a new one. Carved roughly from local stone, its shape simple but unmistakable, a cow tall and proud with markings on its side that seem eerily familiar. You look closer. The symbols aren't letters. They're not patterns. The kind Io used to tie into temple offerings. The kind only she would remember. Io stares. It's not grand. It's not even particularly well carved, but it's hers. Someone somewhere remembered the priestess behind the cow, and they left this quiet, unannounced on the path. She approaches it cautiously, head low. You follow at a respectful distance, heart squeezing like a knot in wet cloth. She presses her nose to the base of the statue, and the fly blessedly, mercifully disappears. Not forever, not magically, just for now. You sit beside her under the shade of a fig tree, sharing the silence. A shepherd passes by with his flock and nods solemnly. He doesn't speak. No one does. It feels like a moment that doesn't want to be narrated. That night, Io sleeps soundly for the first time since this all began. And while she rests, you dream strange, looping dreams of temple floors and divine footsteps and ropes made of moonlight. When you wake, she's still there, breathing deeply. The wind plays with her ears, the statue remains. And for a moment you wonder, maybe this is what myth really is, not a punishment or an epic or a lesson, but just a pause, a recognition, a spot on the earth that says you were here and it mattered. By midday, the path grows dustier and the sun feels heavier, like someone turned up the warmth setting without telling the trees. Io rises slowly, hooves hesitant, her gaze lingering on the stone statue that marked her. You watch her nuzzle it one last time, then turn away and continue her walk. Not with panic, not with purpose, just persistence. She's not running anymore. She's just moving. You follow her along a ridge that overlooks a crooked river. The water below is so still it reflects the sky in one long blue blink. Villagers on the far bank point up toward Io as she crosses the high path. One of them says, "There goes the cow of prophecy." Another, "She passed last week too." Apparently, time doesn't always make sense in myth. Eventually, you descend into a small settlement, one of those in-between places that barely makes it onto maps but somehow has 3 shrines, 7 chickens, and a man who claims to have met Apollo in a dream involving lentils. Io pauses here. She lowers her head to drink from a stone trough and you sit beside her on the edge, letting your feet dangle. A young woman approaches, eyes wide, arms full of herbs. Is it true, she asks softly, that she used to be more? You nod. She still is. The girl presses a hand to her chest and offers Io a sprig of thyme. Io sniffs it, accepts. The two share a glance brief and strangely human. Then the girl vanishes back into the folds of the town the way small miracles often do. And so the journey continues. You pass carved stones that mark where Io once stumbled. A hillside where it said she'd lay down and shape the land's curve. Even a low cave with soot marks and a small inscription Io was here. In some versions, it's written in ancient script. In others, it's just scratched hoof marks next to a few faded olive pit. Historians still debate whether these sites were created in real time or added later by followers retroactively constructing her legend. Some claim the myth evolved to match the land. Others believe the land bent itself to carry the story. Either way, Io is becoming eternal. And then, without fanfare, you reach the edge of Egypt. There's no gate, no border posts, just a change in air, a shift in birdsong. And suddenly, the sand feels closer, the wind's drier, and the story's more golden around the edges. Egypt, where pyramids dream in sunburnt stone, where gods walk sideways on murals, and where Greeks liked to place their myths when they ran out of space at home. Io steps cautiously into this new landscape, her reflection blurred in a long canal that threads its way toward the Nile. And the people here, they've heard of her? They don't call her Io, though. They have other names. They call her Isis or sometimes Hathor, depending on the story. To them, she's already divine, a cow-faced goddess with wide eyes, sacred milk, and a crown shaped like the crescent of the moon. You watch Io stand tall for the first time in days. Here, she's not a curse, not a scandal. She's worshipped. A temple priestess draped in linen, eyes lined with kohl, places a wreath of papyrus flowers around her horns. "You've returned," she whispers as if picking up an old conversation. Io doesn't flinch. She lowers her head in what might almost be a bow. Later you sit in the shade of a date palm as the locals prepare a feast. Not for you, and not really for Io either, but for what she represents, the journey. The endurance, the strange way gods forget their consequences, but mortals remember everything. You're offered bread and honey. You accept. Somewhere the gadfly buzzes once faintly, then disappears. Peace? For now. And in that quiet, you start to realize this isn't just the story of a jealous goddess and a frightened girl. It's a migration. A transformation so complete that even the name changes. Io is not Io anymore. She's myth. She's memory. She's the reason a river bends a certain way, and why some cows wear garlands in spring. And even if no one agrees on the details, everyone agrees on one thing. She mattered. The Egyptian sun rests heavier on your shoulders than the Greek one ever did. It doesn't shine so much as press slowly, deliberately, like a warm hand guiding everything towards stillness. And here in this heat with the Nile curling softly in the distance, Io finally slows her hooves. She's not running. Not anymore. Not from Hera. Not from Zeus. Not from the fly of the eyes, or the myth that's followed her like a shadow stitched in divine thread. She stands now beneath a carved archway flanked by two towering pillars, etched with scenes of animals walking in lines. Lions, ibis, crocodiles. And cows. Always cows. Some walk beside humans, others wear elaborate crowns. One near the top has stars painted on her back and a crescent moon balanced between her horns. See, a temple boy says beside you, that one's Hathor. She brings music and milk and dreams. Io doesn't react, but you see her shoulders, those broad, dusty shoulders, ease just slightly. People have been whispering about her since she arrived, not in fear but with curiosity, awe. She's not a stranger here. She's a prophecy fulfilled. A silhouette the stories were already making room for. Inside the temple, priests arrange offerings, bowls of barley, pomegranates, sweet water from the Nile. None of it demanded, all of it given. She's still in cow form, still mute, still aching. But something around her has changed. The air feels reverent. No one calls her cursed. No one shouts, no one tries to catch her or tie her or twist her into a warning. Instead, they welcome her. A woman approaches with slow steps holding a thin reed dipped in ochre paint. She reaches toward Io's side just under her ribs and paints a single curved line. A blessing, not a brand. May your wandering shape the stars, she whispers. Io doesn't move. You walk with her to the temple's shaded courtyard where papyrus rustles gently and the stones stay cool beneath your sandals. A group of children plays nearby, tossing lotus petals into a clay basin and giggling every time the petals land upside down. One of them looks at Io and asks, "Why is the goddess tired?" His sister, slightly older, replies without looking up because she carried the sky for too long. You sit with that line. Let it rest beside you. Let it unfurl. Because Io has been carrying more than hooves can bear. The weight of unwanted transformation, the humiliation of exile, the silence of being trapped in a form that no one understands, and worst of all, the memory fading now of what it felt like to be believed, to be whole, to be Io. And now, she is still herself, but also more. She is myth layered on myth. A story retold so many times that no one knows where the real girl ends and the sacred cow begins. Historians still argue whether the Egyptian reverence for sacred cattle grew out of this myth or was already part of their older theology. Some say Io merged with Hathor by accident through cultural osmosis, through travelers repeating her name in temples they didn't understand. Others claim it was purposeful, a divine recycling of one woman's pain into something that made sense. Either way, Io has arrived somewhere that finally recognizes her. You stay in Egypt for a while. There's no rush, no pursuers, no flies. She grazes near riverbanks, dips her hooves in sacred pools, and sometimes she lifts her head and stares at the horizon like she remembers something before the curse. One morning, a new priest arrives from the south. He brings news from Delphi. Zeus, he says, is sending a message. No lightning, no roaring, just a whisper through the reed stalks. It's time. Time for what no one says. But that evening, under a sky bleeding slowly from copper to black, something in Io begins to shift. The temple grows quiet. The waters calm. You kneel beside her, brush your hand lightly across her flank and feel it change. It's not dramatic, not glowing or sudden, just slow, gentle, a quiet reversal. Her hooves soften, her back narrows, her breath changes pitch, and when she lifts her face, eyes wide and human again, she doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. She just looks at you tired, scarred, older than she ever wanted to be, and she's back, still changed, still layered with stories, but herself. Io, at last. The next morning dawns not with trumpets or divine fanfare, but with the quiet rustle of reeds and the slow breath of the Nile. You rise to find Io already awake, her human form curled under a linen shawl offered by the temple priests the night before. She's sitting by the water's edge, toes trailing lazy ripples, her face turned east as the sunlight climbs toward her. She doesn't say much, not at first. What could she say, really? You sit beside her. The silence is comfortable, sacred even, and when she finally speaks, it's soft. I don't remember what I looked like. You nod. Myth has a way of sanding off the details. What she wore, how she tied her hair, which gods she used to pray to when her world was still made of temples and light incense smoke, all of it foggy now. Overwritten by hooves and hills and the sound of her own lowing voice echoing through valleys no one else could name. She's human again, yes, but she's not the same. Not that she expected to be. People around her begin to adjust. Temple servants offer new robes. An elder woman takes her hands and without a word begins to massage scented oil into her fingers like she's welcoming her back to herself. They don't call her Io here. Not really. They call her Aset or Wandering Hathor, or sometimes just the Returned One. The name Io belongs more to Greece now, to whispered stories in olive groves and footpaths scratched into coastal cliffs. Here she is reborn, and it shows. Her shoulders square, her voice returns. She begins to speak more, ask questions. One afternoon, she laughs an actual full-body laugh at the sight of a donkey slipping on a fig. Progress. Historians still argue whether this part of the myth, the restoration, was an original element or a later addition from storytellers who needed a happy ending. Some versions end with her still lost, still wandering. Others say she died in Egypt and was reborn among the stars. The Egyptians, as always, folded her into their theology with ease. If she glowed, she was divine. If she suffered, she was meaningful. If she endured, she belonged. You and Io explore the city together. She points out a market stall selling pomegranates and says, "That smell. I remember that smell from before." She tries roasted dates, dances once to a flute melody, and touches the carved symbols on a temple wall with a kind of reverent confusion. "This is supposed to be me," she asks, gesturing at a mural of Hathor, celestial cow mother of music and joy. You shrug. Sort of. The mural stares back in profile, serene, moon-crowned, draped in stars. Io snorts. She looks like she's never had dirt in her teeth. You grin. Not even once. She begins to spend her mornings in the sanctuary garden pressing flower seeds into the soil with quiet determination. Locals join her. No one asks for blessings, but they do leave small gifts: a mirror, a braid of garlic, a necklace strung with river stones. At night, she sits by the water and listens to papyrus rustle in the breeze. Sometimes she tells you things. Not about Zeus, she never speaks his name again. Not about Hera, though once in a quiet moment she admits, "I don't think she hated me, really. She hated the feeling of not being enough." But mostly she talks about before. About sunlight on marble floors. About prayers whispered while sweeping temple thresholds. About the way sandalwood smoke curls when you light it right. You realize she's reclaiming it all. Not loudly, not in rebellion, just quietly, like laying bricks back in place after a storm. Her myth is softening, shifting. She's no longer just the cow who fled the woman-turned-beast, the creature who bled a path across continents. She's becoming a gardener again. A voice. A girl with sandals and a laugh, and a memory of time tied to her belt. And through it all, the people here, Egyptians, Greeks, passers-by, continue to shape their stories around her. They name a new shrine for her. Paint her standing on a bark of stars. Write her name in gold on the edge of a temple wall next to symbols for endurance, truth, and moonlight. And when she walks through the city now, no one stares. They bow, or smile, or offer her dates and wine and ask softly, "Are you well today?" Wandering one. And she answers every time, "Yes, I am." The sky shifts again. It's late afternoon when a caravan arrives from the north. Traders, scholars, priests. They come bearing scrolls, spices, stories, and sandals that squeak slightly when they walk. One of them, a man with ink-stained fingers and a voice like honey gone bitter, approaches the temple asking for her. "Not Hathor, not a Set, Io," he says. You and Io exchange a glance. It's been a while since anyone said that name out loud. The man claims to be a scribe from Thebes, but he speaks Greek with a faint northern accent. There are temples still telling your story. He tells her. Even as far as Argos. She raises an eyebrow. Argos. He nods. They say you left hoofprints on the moon. That earns him a snort. But the name sticks in her mouth after that. Argos. Her homeland. The place where this entire mess began. And now, out of nowhere, it's nudging back into the corner of her thoughts like a long-forgotten tune. You walk with her that evening under a sky smeared with peach and indigo. She seems distracted. "Do you miss it?" you ask. She chews on a fig seed and doesn't answer right away. "I don't know if I miss it," she says finally, "but I wonder if it remembers me." You wonder too. Historians still argue about what happened next. Some say she stayed in Egypt forever, elevated as a living goddess until her final breath. Others claim she returned to Greece walking barefoot through Argos in the dead of night, her name whispered in marketplaces and scratched under bridges. Still others think she never existed at all. But she does. You're walking next to her. And tomorrow she's leaving. Not in haste, not out of fear, just curiosity. She wants to see what happened to the place where she began. To see if the olive trees still bloom in spring, if the temple walls still carry soot from sacred fire, if anyone remembers the girl who used to kneel before the goddess. Before the goddess turned on her, you help her pack. It's not much. A shawl, a pouch of dates, a palm-sized bronze mirror with a crack that runs like lightning across one corner. You offer to go with her. She says yes. The journey back is slower than the one that brought her here. The land seems flatter, the wind less urgent. You pass villages that have forgotten their names, rivers that have twisted into new shapes. Children point at Io's face and ask, "Are you a story?" She smiles sometimes. When you reach the border of Greece, nothing dramatic happens. No thunder, no divine confrontation, just the soft crunch of her sandals on familiar soil. And the smell, wild oregano, sharp and clean, makes her stop. "I remember this," she whispers. You arrive in Argos at dusk. It's quieter than expected. Not empty, just gentler. No one recognizes her. Why would they? The woman who returns is not the girl who left, and the world has kept moving. Still, she walks the paths she once knew. The temple is still there, partially rebuilt vines curling around cracked columns. The olive grove behind it stands, tall leaves catching the fading sun in silver-green flashes. She places a hand on one trunk, leans her forehead against the bark. It doesn't respond, but it doesn't need to. She's not here for signs. She's here for closure. A young priest, barely 16, approaches her with a bowl of wine and a wary look. "Are you here for the offering?" he asks. She smiles faintly. "No, I'm the one it's for." He blinks. "Oh, then you want to light the incense." She does. She steps into the temple barefoot. Now each step quiet as myth. At the altar, she lifts the copper dish, sprinkles crushed thyme, and strikes a spark. Smoke coils. Not a symbol this time, not a metaphor. Just scent. Memory. Presence. You stand beside her, not speaking. The moment doesn't need narration. Outside, a breeze kicks up. Leaves rustle. Somewhere a cow lows in the distance. And Io breathes in. You stay in Argos a while, long enough for the townspeople to notice the woman who visits the temple every morning and never asks for anything. She doesn't preach, doesn't perform miracles, just lights a bit of thyme and sits in the shade of the olive trees. And gradually, they begin to sit with her. At first, it's just the temple boy, then an old woman with a faded scarf, then a carpenter with paint still on his fingers, a pregnant widow, a goat herder with a limp. They don't say much, they just sit. Like something about Io's stillness makes space for their own. In time, someone carves a bench under the largest olive tree. Not officially, of course. It just appears. With a cushion sewn from old temple cloth and a shallow bowl for holding petals or coins or questions. That's what it becomes, in a way, a quiet question. What happens when a girl survives the gods? She doesn't become one. She doesn't become whole. She becomes something else, something mortal but lived in. A story you can touch. Historians still debate whether this phase of the myth was ever part of the canonical version. Some argue it's a modern addition, an attempt to soften the tragedy with a little post-traumatic healing. Others insist there's archaeological evidence in Argos, the bench. The carvings, the temple soot layered with ash from unfamiliar herbs. Regardless, she's here. She spends her afternoons walking the coastline. She collects shells, skips stones, waves back at fishing boats she'll never board. The sun is different now, softer, less demanding. She lets it warm her shoulders without flinching. One day, a traveler stops her near the market. "Are you the woman who became a cow?" Io tilts her head. "No." Pause. "I'm the cow who became a woman." The traveler looks confused, but nods respectfully as if he's heard stranger things. You both laugh about it later. There's more joy in her now, not the dazzling kind, the steady, weathered kind, the kind that lingers after you've survived more than anyone should have to survive. In the evenings, you sit near the temple again. She tells you about the stars over Egypt, about the peacock feathers in Hera's palace. about the feeling of hooves on marble floors and how absurdly itchy cow skin can be in the summer. She doesn't hate Hera anymore. Not really. I think she muses one night Hera was just tired of being humiliated. And I happen to be there? You nod. And Zeus, she shrugs. He probably doesn't even remember. That stings a little, but also it frees her, because when the god forgets and the woman remembers, the power shifts. Memory becomes its own kind of divinity. She begins sketching in the dirt shapes that might be maps or dreams or constellations. You ask what she's drawing. My daughter, she says. You blink. You have a daughter. She nods. Not yet, but I will. You don't ask how she knows, she just does. And sure enough, weeks later, the priestess of the temple, a girl named Melantha, who braids rosemary into her sandals, receives a dream. In it, she sees a silver river, a blazing horn crown, and the words, Epiphus shall be born. The scholars descend immediately, of course. Scrolls unfurl, debates reignite. Epiphus, the child of Ao and Zeus, destined to found dynasties, cities, and myths of his own. But Io shrugs at all of it. I just want to hold a baby again, she says, one that isn't a metaphor. So she rests, eats well, walks often, and when the child comes, the sky is gentle, the gods are silent, and the olive trees whisper like lullabies. You're there when she names him. Not in a temple, not before a crowd, just by the sea under the stars, with his tiny hand wrapped around one of hers and the other curled around a fig leaf. Epiphus means touched, she explains. Then, after a beat, but this time no one touches him unless I say so. You smile. She smiles. And the night air wraps around you like a soft curtain. The story isn't over, but it's safe now. The years pass like waves, one soft crest after another, until the events that once burned feel distant like dreams you wake from knowing they mattered, even if you can't name why. Epiphus grows. He learns to walk on the temple stones and catch frogs in the irrigation channels. He thinks olives are gross and peacocks are hilarious, and sometimes pretends his mother is a queen, even though she tells him with a wry smile, I'm more of a footnote. He doesn't understand what that means yet, but he will. You spend your days between sea breezes and sun-warmed dust, watching as Io shapes her new life, not like a goddess or a myth, but like a woman rebuilding with whatever stones are within reach. She teaches Epaphus to speak in both tongues, the clipped vowels of Argos and the softer flow of Egyptian. He mixes them into something of his own. A child of two worlds, two histories, two myths that never quite stitch together but somehow hold. Visitors still come. Pilgrims, scholars, curious grandmothers, a poet who insists he's writing a tragedy loosely inspired by her life. Io listens, nods, and gently redirects the conversation toward whether he's had the honey cakes from the southern stalls. He hasn't. He cries when he does. Some people ask for blessings. Others bring offerings. Most just want to see the woman who became a story and then kept going. She never gives speeches. But one day she stands in the agora beside a new statue, a bronze one taller than life freshly installed by the city council. It's supposed to be her, but she laughs because it's a little too heroic. Too poised, no mud on the sandals. A little girl asks her, Is that really you? And Io kneels down, brushing a curl from the girl's forehead. No, but it's who they needed me to be. Then, after a pause, and that's okay too. Historians still debate whether Epaphus truly founded Memphis in Egypt, as later myths claim. Some say his name was retrofitted into existing lineages to give divine legitimacy to early kings. Others argue he never existed outside poetic invention, an attempt to retro-engineer destiny backward into a woman's suffering. But you know the truth sits somewhere quieter. In the evenings, you see Io tracing the edge of the Nile in the dirt with her toe, while Epaphus runs nearby chasing a lizard with a stick. She looks tired. Not the kind of tired that asks for pity, just the kind that comes from having lived a lot of life on both two legs and four hooves. Sometimes I wonder if the gods made me a cow, just so I'd be too distracted to ask better questions, she says. You chuckle. Like what? She shrugs. Like why gods get to break things and call it fate. You sit beside her. Watch as the stars blink into existence like crumbs spilled across the velvet sky. I don't think they know the answers either, you murmur. She smiles at that. Later, she and Epiphus begin building a small structure near the olive grove. Not a shrine, not a tomb, just a space open on three sides with a low roof and smooth stone benches. A place to sit, to breathe, to not perform. People begin using it without instruction. They leave notes, little offerings, questions scrawled into clay tablets. No one tells them to. They just do. It becomes known as the place of returning. Not because Io lives there, but because something about it, the silence, the slope of the roof, the smell of time, makes people remember who they were before the noise. Io never calls it hers. But she sweeps the floor each morning, and every once in a while she finds a feather stuck in the wooden beam above the entrance. Peacock. Always peacock. She doesn't remove them, just lets them stay. Little reminders. Not of punishment, not of shame, just of memory. Because Hera in her jealous rage created Argus, and in mourning him created beauty, and in beauty left behind the parts of the story that no one expected to stay soft. You close your eyes, and for a moment the wind sounds like a lullaby only cows would know. Spring rolls in, not like a parade, but like a whisper buds forming quietly on the olive branches. Bees lazily returning to their buzzing rituals, and the city of Argos stretching like an old cat in the morning sun. Io, now older, watches it all with the calm expression of someone who's seen too much to be surprised by anything and still chooses to care anyway. Epiphus has grown. He's taller than her now, wild-haired and sunburned, quick to laugh and quicker to defend. One afternoon, he gets into an argument with a merchant who insists cows can't be divine. Io watches from a bench nearby, amused. He doesn't say, "My mom was a cow," that would be too easy. Instead, he says, "Some people are blessed, some are cursed. My mother survived both." That shuts the merchant up. Later that night, you and Io sit beneath the stars, the sea humming in the distance like a sleeping giant. She's weaving a garland from dried fig leaves and lavender. Her hands are slower now, but just as sure. "You think it's weird," she says. You blink. "What?" "That I stayed. After everything. That I didn't burn something down." You shake your head. "I think it's remarkable." She doesn't reply for a while, just ties off the garland and sets it gently on the bench between you. They still talk about Zeus, she says eventually. Still sing songs about his power, his lightning, his appetites. You wait. And Hera, they call her noble, dutiful, protective. And you ask softly. She chuckles. "I'm a cautionary tale. A lesson for young girls in temples, don't catch the wrong gods, I." You want to argue. Want to tell her she's more than that, but you don't. Because she already knows. And also because she doesn't care. Not in the bitter way, in the healed way. "I chose this," she says, gesturing to the quiet around her. "Not the beginning, but this." You understand. Historians still argue about the symbolic role of Io in the broader Greek pantheon. Some interpret her story as a metaphor for colonization Greece, stretching into Egypt myth, wrapping itself around geography like ivy. Others see her as a symbol of transformation, the divine female experience filtered through patriarchal divinity and sanitized for heroism. But here now, she's none of those things. She's a mother, a gardener, a woman who once bore divine attention like a branding iron and now prefers to wake slowly, pick figs, and wave to the neighbor's dog. A bird lands on her shoulder. It's not a peacock, just a pigeon with poor depth perception and ambitious claws. Still, she doesn't flinch. She lets it stay. You both watch the horizon for a long time until the sky begins to soften into that in-between color where dusk hasn't quite left and night hasn't fully arrived. And for the first time in a long time, she speaks the name, Zeus. The word hangs in the air. "I don't forgive him," she says. You nod. "I don't hate him either," she adds. You look at her. "I just released him." You blink. "It's heavy," she explains, carrying someone else's power. And there it is, the final shape of her journey. Not vengeance, not glory, just release. A quiet exhale. A letting go that no god ever managed to teach, but a woman long turned back from cow and chaos now understands fully. She reaches out and places the garland in your lap. For, remembering, she says, you don't ask what. You don't need to. There's a new rumor in Argos. It says that if you walk alone through the olive grove at just the right time when the morning fog is still yawning off the stones and the cicadas haven't started complaining, you might see her. Not Io as she is now, but Io as she was. A flicker of girlhood, a glimmer of hooves, a shimmer in the space between myth and breath. The townspeople don't speak of it loudly. They treat it like whether something to notice, maybe comment on, but not analyze too hard. And you just smile. Because if there's one thing Io deserves, it's a haunting that's soft. She still walks the same path every day. Temple, garden, grove, shore. Sometimes she stops to braid a little girl's hair. Sometimes she helps carry baskets of onions to the market. Sometimes she just sits and watches the light shift across stone like it's telling secrets in a language only survivors understand. Epiphus, too, has become something of a legend in his own right. Young, bold, with too much heart and not enough patience. He talks about founding cities, great ones with names that echo forever. Io listens with a smirk and a soft the way all mothers do when their sons invent the future out loud. You think he'll do it, you ask one evening as you both watch him skip rocks like declarations across the water. Io shrugs. If he does, I hope he builds a bench too. A pause. I've come to love benches. And that's how the second rumor begins. That the most sacred spot in all of Argos isn't the main altar or the fountain, or the stone slab where heroes were crowned, but a modest, shaded bench under a crooked olive tree where the woman who once outran Olympus now simply rests. No thunderbolts, no oracles, just a seat, and if you're quiet and you sit long enough, you might hear the rustle of hooves and dry leaves, or the faint flick of a tail that doesn't exist anymore, or a breath. Hera's temple, by contrast, has grown more elaborate. Wider stairs, more statues, a newer roof painted in lapis and gold. The priestesses wear taller headdresses now, and the incense burns longer into the night. But Io doesn't visit, not because she's afraid. She simply doesn't need to. She's not part of that world anymore. One afternoon, a letter arrives from Delphi delivered by a breathless boy with legs too long for his sandals. It invites Io to return to sacred discourse and participate in a public rectification of mythic narratives. She reads it over breakfast, then uses it to light the cooking fire. When you raise an eyebrow, she shrugs. If they want to rectify something, they can start with their seating arrangements. Historians still argue whether her rejection of Delphi marked the decline of its influence or was merely coincidental. The dates line up, but myth is slippery that way. Meanwhile, the bench gets polished weekly. By whom, no one knows. It's never the same person twice. And people keep coming, not just for Io, for themselves, to remember what it means to keep walking even when your feet change shape. To sit, to breathe, to forgive the sky without needing to understand it. Sometimes Hera sends signs, a sudden breeze, a dream shaped like feathers. Once a cart of grapes overturned in the plaza, and every last fruit landed unbruised. The townsfolk whispered it was a truce. Io didn't say anything. She just bit into a grape, spat out a seed, and kept walking. That night, you ask if she still dreams of running. She smiles. Not anymore. Then, more softly. Now I dream of standing still, and nothing chasing me. And for once, there's no joke. Just a long silence, and a full moon round and watchful reflected perfectly in the temple basin. You wake to the sound of laughter, not the kind that echoes from drunken parties or staged rituals. No, this is quieter, domestic, real. It's Io seated on the temple steps surrounded by children. Some are local, some are travelers. A few are just there for the figs. But they all listen as she tells them the story of a cow. Not a divine one, not a cursed one. Just a confused cow trying very hard to stay out of trouble. There's a moment where she pauses mid-sentence, mid-gesture, and catches your eye. You raise a brow. She shrugs as if to say, hey, they asked. And they did. Because as the years rolled on, her story stopped being a warning and started being a bedtime tale. One with animals and stars, and a slightly passive-aggressive goddess who may or may not have needed therapy. No one remembers the first time a child fell asleep under the olive tree while she spoke, but it became a tradition. And over time, the temple priests began leaving soft cushions out near the roots. Not for the gods, for the listeners. You spend your days there now too. Listening. Sometimes narrating when Io needs a break. Sometimes just watching the bees work through lavender stalks like tiny bureaucrats with wings. Argos is changing again. New roads, new statues, new whispers. But the bench remains, and so does she. Older now, slower, but never brittle. Like an old oak, weathered maybe, but rooted in something deeper than myth. Epiphus visits often. He's got big ideas, something about building a city where Egypt meets the sea. He's even named it Memphis. Io chuckles every time he says it like she knows something the historians don't. Go ahead, she tells him. Just don't forget to plant trees and benches. And he promises he will. Scholars from Athens send letters asking for interviews, relics, authentic divine quotes. One even offers a grant to capture Io's unique semi-theological feminist arc. She writes back, please send figs. Some say she never died, that one day she just walked beyond the olive grove and into the morning fog, and the cows watched her go, and the earth didn't even rustle. Others say she became part of the wind, the kind that makes temple doors creak even when they're sealed shut. Still others insist she's buried beneath that crooked bench, her heart returned to soil, her story etched into root and rock. But you know better. You know she chose peace. And that peace is a choice, not a reward, not a gift, but something clawed from the belly of chaos and shaped into something soft enough to sit on. Now the sun dips low again. Another evening in Argos. And as the last fig falls from the tree and the last child's breath slows into dreams, Io whispers, I hope no one turns into anything tomorrow. You grin. Same. And now, as the bench settles into shadow, and the sky folds itself into a velvet hush, you breathe out. Slower this time. The leaves overhead rustle just once, like a hand brushing against fabric. Somewhere nearby, a goat sighs in its sleep. The scent of thyme curls through the air, carried by a breeze that no longer runs its strolls. The olive tree stands. Watch its roots tangled with time, its bark pressed with stories too old for paper. You imagine your own feet beside it, dusty, calloused, real. You imagine sitting down on that bench beside her, no words needed, just two figures sharing silence in the soft geometry of dusk. A myth walked into a woman walked into history, and now she rests. So should you. Let the past become a cradle, not a chain. Let the names fade into lullabies, the gods drift into the background like music too slow to dance to. Your breath evens out, your shoulders unclench. Even the stars seem to blink more slowly now. It's okay to stop running. It's okay to sit. It's okay to sleep. And if by morning you find a feather on your pillow or the faint scent of figs on your skin, well, maybe that's just your body remembering. Good night, traveler. Sweet dreams.